Hey, friends. I decided to end up bringing another rant to the table. I know it's been a long while. And to those of you who end up seeing the picture of a Chaos Space Marine, don't worry, there will be more 40k content coming in the future. But lately I've been on a very large RPG kick, and I decided that I'd start documenting a few of my more recent experiences and a few thoughts that have been coming up. More particularly, recently, I had to pull away from a Black Crusade game. Now, I absolutely love Black Crusade. I like the 40k setting. I think it makes for some very interesting characters, especially if you are the more badass kick in the door style. But there's a point where it's kind of a breaking point for me. And this is my own personal taste. Maybe you'll notice this in your group. Maybe you are one of these players. I hope not, but you know, what can I do about it? I wanted to discuss failing to play the character. And you are most likely to run into this whenever there is established canon for a universe that is very popular outside of an RPG community. Star Wars is another one. Thankfully, I ended up getting involved in a Star Wars game that might take off and has been going wonderfully. But Black Crusade, on the other hand, I started off with a character. Now, this character was an apostate, and the basic idea was that these players were saying, "Oh yeah, well we really need a face. We need somebody who, really can end up doing a lot of the command and role playing stuff." Yes, they weren't really accustomed to role playing. Fine, not a problem. I'll give it a shot. Or at least that's how I started. My first game, I sat around for, I believe it was almost 4 hours. I said probably 16 to 20 lines of dialogue in character. If that wasn't bad enough, the one discussion that, if it happened in character, would have been wonderful between the ship's captain, who I believe was a champion chaos at the time, and a heretic, was instead brought as an out of character bickering match between these two players, saying like why we should do this, why we should do that. On a slightly off topic note, yes, servitors are 10 times better than an actual crew, even if you can't trust your heretic. But that beside the point. That was an issue, but it wasn't what ended up throwing me out of the game. It was the second time around. The second time around, we board a ship and we're about to lay claim to it. We have defeated and demoralized most of the crew. The captain is waiting for us on the bridge, and we're about to end up taking it over. And just as soon as I opened my mouth, these are literally the first words that came out of my character's mouth since we started 2 hours ago. As soon as I started talking to the ship's captain, apparently one of the players may have taken exception to this because his immediate point is I try and hack his head off with my chain axe. To those of you playing Corn, this is a good point to make. Corn doesn't suffer fools to live. And if you think that the slaughter of a single individual is going to appease him, you clearly don't know how much blood actually flows around his skull throne. When you end up killing the opportunities of every single player to engage because the GM put somebody there, so clearly they must die. Something horrible has happened. You've not only denied the chance to engage with this world that your GM has taken a lot of time to try and create and reimagine, but you're also killing for a few other players, myself in this case. And yes, I'm feeling a little selfish today. Deal with it. Now, what's the other problem with this, though? He's playing a core knight. He'll kill anything. He's a berserker, right? No, 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 no. See, a berserker might say something as stereotypical as blood for the blood god, but that's a common Khorne saying. However, suck my balls is probably not what you're expecting out of a fallen angel of death that served the Emperor for what could be centuries. Wandering through the warp doesn't incline you to act like a mentally challenged junior high student, especially if you're a, let's be generous, 25 to 30-year-old player. If your belief is that you can randomly spurt out some of the shit you would say in Xbox Live and consider that in-character dialogue, reality is you are not trying to engage in the setting. You are not trying to play a Space Marine. What you're trying to play is yourself with the ability to say, I got power armor, I'm wielding a chain axe. There's nothing that will derail a game faster. There really isn't. Especially in a pre-made setting, such as the Warhammer 40k universe or the Star Wars universe. It's one thing to end up starting with these kinds of crass characters, clearly crass. And if you know the player out of character, you probably can tell the difference pretty freaking quickly. But if your notion is to effectively, like I said, basically use the kind of banter you would hear on an Xbox Live a game of Call of Duty and think that's how a Space Marine acts, you might want to reconsider what game you're playing. Let's elaborate here for a minute. If you're playing, well, let's take one that I'm really familiar with. If you're playing a Space Marine who's well on his way to following the course of Slaanesh, you attract a personal magnetism. You attract people to you. You bring people to your cause. The words that are spoken from your mouth need to be said with some thought. If I'm screaming suck my dick every 2 seconds, and I do apologize for the harsh language, but if that's what you're screaming every 2 seconds, I can almost guarantee you the morale of your men are not going to be roused. In fact, they probably would question whether you're worth following, turn on you in a moment's notice, and then, well, be damned with you. Your soul deserves to be wandering the plain of Slaanesh, probably to be devoured by all manners of fiend. You are trying to portray a hardened veteran. Vengeance is on your mind. You are portraying a character who's fallen away from the Emperor. He sees the Imperium for what it is, a rotting husk with a corpse on top of a golden throne being propped up. More machine, man. He hinders the worlds you see. Yeah, you may have to burn a few worlds, but that's a small price to pay to end up showing others that you can become so much more if only you listen to the whispers. Those silent words that carry forth in dreams from the war. The powers of chaos call to you, and they offer you power. They offer you followers. They offer you true might to become the stuff of legends, to lead a black crusade. Now, if your game isn't up to a par where you're enjoying yourself, you need to really stop and consider. I gave the GM another shot and said, "You want to know what? This is the kind of stuff I'm looking for. You got to consider that. You're a player. Your time is just as valuable as theirs. And it's with that in mind, you should consider heavily whether you should continue in these kinds of games or not. If you're not enjoying yourself, if you're a role player, someone who actually gets inside the headspace of the character you're making and wants to live and breathe in these worlds, then do so. But if you like just throwing dice and saying, I got to upgrade Terminator armor and, I have a Kami here flamer in one arm and a power mace in the other, you're not contributing anything to the game. It's not interesting when you start speaking. And the worst part is that these players will oftentimes, at length, start talking about things that aren't relevant in the game, particularly things that might have happened like 3 or 4 sessions ago, like as though it's interesting, and try and portray it that it was more awesome than it really was. And the worst part of this is that the Coles Notes version is usually told in a more interesting fashion than when it actually happened. You might talk about how you kicked a ship's captain out of freaking airlock, which sounds like a really cool scene, until you realize that the way that scene broke down was I grab the captain and I kick him out the airlock. Usually that's met with silence, maybe some jeers, maybe a lot of people looking across the table going, are you serious? But that's the way of things. It was when I realized that I was actually taking game time out from another game I was enjoying heavily in order to try to play in Black Crusade that I had to just say no. I enjoyed the first game that I was involved in. When I had to cut time out of something I was enjoying to play something that I was beginning to dread, even after just a second session, it's time to move on. If there's a lesson to be gained here, a as this is going to be painful to say, and I can already hear the comments right now, but better no game than a bad game. No game still leaves you with wonder, the what if, what can happen. You start to go back into that headspace of what it would be like to play these characters. What would it be like to be one of the fallen chosen of the Emperor? Or to be a heretic that indulges in those forbidden bits of Xenos technology. Maybe you're an apostate, you used to be part of the administratum, and instead decided to turn, still leveraging your position, being a secret agent of chaos, simple cultist, or maybe a renegade, a fallen guardsman. Maybe somebody starting up their own traitor legion. Who knows? But when you play in a bad game, all of that wonder, all of that interesting characters you could come up with is gone. It doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. Because all that matters is killing the next thing in front of you, rolling a lot of dice, and waiting for somebody to give you their turn. To me, that's unacceptable to anyone. If you really want to end up playing these kinds of games, don't get locked into them. If you want to end, let me correct myself. If you want to play a role playing game, don't be satisfied with these kinds of groups. Some of them might even be attempting to role play. That would be great. But some of them, unfortunately, just aren't. And if you're in one of those games, you're not playing the game you were trying to play. You're swapping what if stories at best, and at worst, you're wasting hours of your time in order to play for 5 minutes because you're not relevant until something happens. And even if you try and make it happen, it's almost guaranteed it'll be brushed aside due to another player trying to do something that at the end of the day doesn't matter or is even remotely interesting to you or anyone else at the table. They're not interested in playing the characters that they ended up writing up. They're only interested in badly played mayhem and being able to enact stupidity while still being able to claim that they play within the universe that they so chose. Sorry that this is turning into a little bit of a bitter note, but you guys got to understand this is therapy for me. As far as I'm concerned, this is recovering from a bad game. So let's try and end this last little bit on a lighter note. When you end up taking the time to end up finding a group that plays the game that you're actually looking for. In my case, recently I ended up actually running into a group for Star Wars, and it's an alternate timeline. It's changing a few events that define the Star Wars universe just to make a little bit of a twist, see what kind of, well, how the world would work if this was the case. And I found it absolutely fascinating. The fact of the matter is I got to end up playing and getting more done in the same amount of time, but was so much more interesting. Able to listen in and hear other players tell me the stories of these characters by me listening in to the story as it unveils. Even the small joking segments of a scoundrel playing a match of, no, there's another term for it, but it's effectively playing poker with his co-pilot when they get that call that the Jedi are currently coming in from orbit after they were presumed dead by the rest of the party, and realizing that this happened in a very awkward time in the game. And somebody gets swindled out of some money because the captain is currently paying more attention to the comms than he is the pot in the middle of the table. So it's already scooped up and on to the next hand. Is they'll cheat, they'll lie, and they'll steal from one another in amusing fashions, but it makes for at least an amusing and if not interesting characterization. These games don't have to be bad. It's just a shame that a lot of them are.